Today we're learning about pesticides. We're focusing on resistance bioaccumulation and something known as bioamplification. We're going to understand how chemicals like pesticides affect species and their food webs. So why do we use pesticides in the first place? Well, it's obvious. We want to kill pests. And pests are organisms that are harmful or considered inconvenient. Pests kill approximately 30% of Canada's crops. This is a big deal. If we could get the number down from 30%, this would increase the productivity of our farmers a lot. And so we want to do that if we can. Pests spread disease. Malaria, for example, is a microbe that lives in human and animal blood. Take a look at this red blood cell. This is infected, and this is a healthy red blood cell. Now, a person with malaria can potentially die, and it also is a very debilitating disease, and it's spread by mosquitoes. In the industrialized world, heavy pesticide use has essentially eliminated malaria. However, malaria is still a major killer in sub-Saharan Africa, with over 190 million cases, which is 90% of the world's total. And of those 190 million cases, there is over 400,000 deaths in 2015. This is information according to the World Health Organization. Now, historically speaking, malaria is possibly the #1 killer of humanity. Now, malaria is a serious disease, and it still is a serious disease, and we need to figure out how to control it better. And some of the answer is pesticides. First-generation pesticides were the pesticides that were first created by humankind. Now, first-generation pesticides include arsenic, lead, and mercury. Now, these things obviously killed pests, but we also know that they're extremely detrimental to other species, and namely us. So, a unique solution that some people came up with originally was tobacco, particularly the nicotine. Now, we know nicotine is an addictive substance to humans, but you probably didn't know that nicotine is actually a pesticide, and it's produced naturally by the tobacco plant to kill pests. It's not meant to be addictive to humans. That's not the intention of nicotine. It just happens to be the original intent by the plant was to protect itself from pests. Humankind eventually came up with second-generation pesticides and moved away from first-generation pesticides because of their dangers. And they created new pesticides in the laboratory. In 1939, DDT was created, and it's a very strong insecticide. We've talked about DDT before, and we know that it was dangerous to the bald eagle population. But something you've probably forgotten is that it's still in our environment today because it sticks around. And this is kind of the hallmark of second-generation pesticides, is they stick around in our environment. There's over 500 different second-generation pesticides still registered in Canada. In Ontario, though, as of 2008, many of them were banned. And they were banned as a result of because they were so dangerous. Now, some of these pesticides, because they've been removed from the market, have made it more difficult for the homeowner to remove pests from their house or their lawn. And things like bed bugs have also made a comeback because people use less and less of these toxic chemicals. So a lot of these chemicals were carbon-based, which means they're organic, but they also contain chlorine atoms. Now, this makes them particularly dangerous. Pesticides that are really big or that contain the atom chlorine are soluble in fat, not water. They're fat soluble, which means they're stored in an organism's fat and cannot be removed by sweat or urine. And that means that these toxins stick in your fat. Or over time, because your body can't easily get rid of them, if you come into a lot of contact with it, it will end up building up in your body. This process is known as bioaccumulation, and this means that the toxin is building up in the body or in the organism over time. So grass that's sprayed with pesticides, it starts to accumulate and build up over time in the grasses. This is a great example. So first you have a clean organism, soon it dissolves some into its body, and over time the concentrations increase as that organism gets older. An older person will bioaccumulate more toxins in their fat than a younger person will. If I measured the fat level, if I measured the toxin level in a young person compared to an old person, the old person would have bioaccumulated higher levels of toxins. This is different than something known as biomagnification, which we're going to talk about next. Biomagnification is the idea that you increase the concentration of pollutant as it moves from one link in the food chain to another. And this is because there's a small amount of fat-soluble pesticides in the environment originally, and it enters the bodies of small animals that are low in the food chain. So even though there's a small amount of toxin in the prey of secondary consumers, the amount of toxins is higher in the secondary consumers because it eats lots of prey. And because you go through this process, the toxin level builds up as it moves up the food chain. Modern pesticides are soluble in water, not in fat. Now this is important because that means it's not going to stay in the fat of the organism. It's not going to bioaccumulate as easily, and it's not going to biomagnify in an ecosystem. Organisms that get these water-soluble toxins in them, they can easily eliminate them. This also means, though, that when rain falls, it will easily get rid of that toxin and remove it from the environment. But it means it's also less effective in some cases. So most modern pesticides are still not selective. They can't pick between organisms which ones you want to kill, which ones you want to keep. So that means pesticides are still dangerous. They're a lot better than they used to be, but some of the sort of side effects are still unknown when you ever have a pesticide. It's a good rule of thumb to always wear your safety equipment when you're using pesticides. The last issue we're going to talk about when we talk about pesticides is pest resistance. And this is the idea that the effectiveness of pesticides lowers over time. This is due to the fact that species become resistant over time after many applications of pesticides. For example, imagine I applied a pesticide that killed 90% of the insects, but only 10% survived. Well, these 10% that survived, they may contain genes in their DNA that help them survive the application. What happens as I do more sprays over and over? And here's our example. You can see in the first spray I have 3 red bugs. Those 3 red bugs are the ones that are able to survive. They're the 10%. All the purple ones will die. The next time I spray, the next year, we still have those 3, but you can see that I have 3 more resistant individuals. And finally, by the time I'm applying my pesticide the 3rd time, you can see that there's more red individuals, meaning there's more able to survive. So over time, that gene is passed on. This is known as a selective pressure, and it's an evolutionary mechanism that caused the species to evolve to become resistance to it. And really what it is it's called the survival of the fittest. The fittest are the ones that are immune to the selective pressure, which happens to be the pesticides, and that's why they survive. Right beside me, you're looking at a graph from weedscience.org. Now this graph shows you all the different resistant species to different types of pesticides. Each color is a different pesticide. On the x-axis we have time, on the y-axis we have the number of species. And as we go across time, we can see that the number of species becoming resistant to our pesticides is also going up. It's increasing. So this means that the more we spray, it's more likely that it's not going to be efficient at killing insects and pests as time goes on. This means that farmers have to use combinations of sprays or more sprays to prevent pests from totally destroying their fields. We constantly have to be looking up new pesticides because pests are constantly fighting back by becoming resistant to the things that we're using in our fields. That's it for today. Hope to see you tomorrow and hope you have some questions regarding today's lesson. Thanks very much.